The morning I found the cup on the rail, I sat down on the porch step and did not move for a long time. Callie pressed herself against my knee, which she only did when she thought I needed steadying. And, I suppose, she was right. The trees across the clearing were dark against a pale November sky, and the only sound was the creek somewhere below the slope, running cold over its stones. I had lived a careful life. I had measured things for a living, marked elevations, filed reports. I was not a man who accepted what he could not account for. But there it was on the rail beside the cup I had left that morning, and I could not account for it at all. I need to go back about 7 weeks to explain what I mean. My wife Nora died in the last week of August, 2 years before any of this happened. Pancreatic. Fast as those things go, which people told me was a mercy, and I understood what they meant without being able to feel it as a mercy at the time. We had been married 31 years. She taught 3rd grade in Ridgemont for 22 of them. She grew tomatoes in buckets on the back step because the soil behind our house in town was more clay than earth. And she left black coffee on the porch rail every morning, summer and winter, right through the cold months because she said something always came sniffing at night, and she wanted whatever it was to know the house was friendly. I thought it was raccoons. I said so more than once. Could be, she would say, still worth the gesture. I retired from mine surveying the spring after she died. 34 years with the State Geological Survey, and when I sat down to do the paperwork for my own retirement, it was the first time I had filled out a form without knowing exactly what I expected from it. The house in Ridgemont felt like a room that had been rearranged while I was sleeping. Everything in the right place, but nothing where I remembered it. The kitchen was too large. The tomato buckets sat empty on the back step all that summer because I could not decide whether to plant them or move them, and I ended up doing neither. My daughter Claire called from Portland 3 times in June, twice in July, once in August. I picked up the first call mostly. I said the right things, I thought, but somewhere around the 3rd week of July, she started leaving messages instead of waiting, and I started listening to them instead of returning them, and by September the calls had stopped, and the silence between us had the specific quality of something that had set, like concrete in cold weather, the kind of fix that does not unharden on its own. 14 months all told, between the last time I heard her voice and the morning I stood at the Aldermore cabin with my truck idling and Del Harwick explaining the posting to me in the parking lot of the county land office in Kessler Falls. Del was the claims officer, a compact man with the particular patience of someone who had spent years delivering information to people who were not ready to receive it. He told me the Aldermore claim was a historical mining parcel up on the west ridge of Sable Creek drainage, about 19 miles of gravel road from the nearest paved highway, active claim status maintained by an absentee owner in Tucson, who paid his fees on time and asked for nothing except that someone check the cabin twice a week through the winter and report any structural concerns. "You'd be going up Mondays and Thursdays," Del said. "Perimeter walk, check the roof line, check the door seal, note anything that needs attention. There's a stove, a cot, a hand pump that needs priming if you haven't been up in a while. Outhouse is serviceable. The owner won't be up until late spring at earliest." He paused, reading something in my face that I had not put there deliberately. "It's quiet work," he said. "That's either a problem or it isn't." "It isn't," I said. Del handed me the key on a steel ring, one key for the door lock and one for the equipment box on the east wall, and wrote the access code for the gate on a card that he said I could throw away once I had it memorized. He told me the previous caretaker had retired to Flagstaff. He did not ask me why I wanted the job. I drove up the following Monday. Late October, the larches just gone from gold to bare. The higher ground already holding a little crust of frost in the shaded places. The cabin sat in a clearing about 60 yards across, surrounded on 3 sides by Douglas fir and hemlock that had been growing there longer than the claim itself. The cabin was old, notched log construction with a metal roof that had been patched in 2 places with sheet tin and roofing screws, and a covered porch that ran the full width of the front face, maybe 8 feet deep. One of the porch boards near the left corner had rotted through from below, splintered along the grain, and I noted it in my first report as a priority repair item. The door was a solid plank affair with iron hardware, including a bar latch on the inside, a simple iron bar that dropped into a socket when you lifted and swung it. I had seen the type before in old mining-era construction. From outside, you could not engage that latch. There was a padlock hasp for the owner's use, but the bar was an interior mechanism, lift and drop, strictly for use when you were already inside and wanted the door held against the wind coming down off the ridge. I opened the cabin, walked the interior, noted 2 small patches of discoloration on the ceiling near the stovepipe collar, checked the hand pump, primed it, and left the door standing open while I did the perimeter walk. Old habit from survey work, leaving a door open in an enclosed building so the air could move while you were away from it. A closed space accumulates itself in uncomfortable ways when no one has been breathing in it for long. I was out maybe 40 minutes. When I came back around the east corner of the cabin, the door was closed. I stood there a moment. I walked over and tried it, and it opened freely, the padlock hasp hanging loose where I had left it, the interior undisturbed. The bar latch was dropped into its socket. I looked at it for a while, lifted it, let it drop again, and felt the solid seat of iron on iron. The wind off the ridge, I thought. Wind pressure from the mountainside could push a door. A door on a spring hinge might swing and catch. This door had no spring, but a good sustained gust might swing it to the stop, and the bar might, under the right vibration, settle toward its socket. I was not fully satisfied with this explanation, but I filed it and drove down the mountain. The following Thursday, I parked at the gate and walked in. October was tightening into November by then, and the mornings at that elevation had a clean, cold clarity that I had not felt since the survey years, when I spent my weeks at altitude and came home to Nora's kitchen on Fridays. I had not meant to think about Nora's kitchen. I was thinking about the stovepipe collar, whether I should put a bead of stove cement around the seam. I was also, without having decided to, carrying a thermos of coffee and a tin cup. I did not think about it until I was standing on the porch and had already poured the cup and set it on the rail at the corner post. It was just what I did. My hands had been doing it every morning at home without my full participation for months, pouring the second cup, setting it on the back step, and here the reflex had followed me up the mountain. I looked at the cup on the rail for a moment and did not move it. Inside, the bar latch was dropped. This bothered me more than the first time because I had come back to it in the days between and landed on an explanation I was willing to accept. And now, the explanation was wearing thin. I spent an hour inside the cabin that morning, studying the door and the airflow patterns and the slope of the floor and the way the latch bar sat in its socket. The socket was worn smooth from years of use, and the bar dropped cleanly when released. What it did not do was drop itself from a horizontal position, which was where you left it when the door was open and the bar was swung back. Horizontal was resting. Dropping required lifting first. Wind could push the door. Wind could not lift the bar. I wrote nothing in my report about the door. Dell did not need to know about things I was still working through. I sat with it through the weekend. I went back to the explanations I had not fully considered. An animal that had found its way in through the stovepipe. A person with access I did not know about. A defect in the latch mechanism I had not identified. I was not satisfied with any of them. By Sunday evening, I had settled into something closer to watchfulness than explanation. The state of mind I used to inhabit during a complicated survey when the elevations were not reading consistently, and you knew you needed more information before you could file with confidence. The third Monday, Callie came with me. She was 11 years old by then, a border collie with one ear that had never fully committed to standing up, a dog who had been Nora's more than mine for most of her life, who had transferred her attention to me after Nora died, with the quiet practicality of an animal who understands that someone needs to be minded. She rode in the truck cab with her chin on the window edge, watching the road, and when I parked at the gate, she stepped out with the careful deliberateness of an older dog who knows her joints and works within them. She liked the cabin. She sniffed the porch boards thoroughly, worked the perimeter of the clearing with her nose low, and settled on the porch step while I went inside. The bar latch was dropped again, third time running. I stood looking at it for a while, then went back outside and sat on the step beside Callie, and drank coffee from the thermos and looked at the tree line. The cup was on the rail where I had set it before going inside. Callie was looking at the trees. This was not unusual behavior for a border collie. They watch things. It is what they are built for. But there was a quality to her attention that morning that I noticed without being able to name, a particular stillness that was different from casual scanning. She was not tracking a bird or a deer. She was holding something with her eyes, something specific, in the hemlock stand at the east edge of the clearing, and she was doing it with her tail low and her body very still, and without any of the subtle distress signals she made when something alarmed her. She was not alarmed. She was attentive. I looked at the hemlock stand. I saw trees, shadow, the usual layering of dark and darker that a dense stand of conifers makes at the tree line. Nothing moved. After a while, Callie shifted, exhaled slowly, and put her chin on her paws. I made a note of it in the small pocket log I had started keeping, separate from my official caretaker reports. Not because I thought any of it was explainable yet, but because I was a surveyor, and surveyors record what they observe and look for patterns. The pattern arrived the following Thursday in the form of the porch board. I had set the rotted section aside on my first visit, a piece roughly 4 feet long, splintered through its middle third, beyond repair and needing replacement. I had put it against the east wall of the cabin under the equipment box overhang, intending to bring lumber up on my next full maintenance day when I had the truck bed clear. When I came around the corner of the porch that Thursday, I stopped and looked at the corner of the porch where the board had been missing. And it was not missing. The gap was filled. Not with lumber. With stones from the creek, flat stones of varying size, fitted together with the careful horizontal logic of dry stone work, the kind of fitting that takes time and a particular eye for how shapes seat against each other. The surface was level with the surrounding boards within about a 1/4 inch, packed tight with smaller stones in the gaps, solid enough that when I put my weight on it, it did not shift. Whoever had done it had pulled stones from the creek and carried them 60 yards uphill and spent real time fitting them together in the cold. I crouched there for a long time. I pressed the stones with my hand and felt how they were fitted, how each piece was chosen for its face dimension. This was not random filling. This was work. I am not a person who believes in things I cannot account for. I want to be clear about that because I want you to understand what the next part cost me to accept. I had spent 34 years applying systematic logic to complex elevation data, and I had never once filed a report that contained a conclusion I could not support from observation. What I had observed at the Aldermore cabin was this: a door that closed itself with an interior bar latch on 3 separate occasions, a section of porch floor that had been repaired with fitted creek stone by an unknown party, and an 11-year-old border collie who had twice in the same week fixed her attention on the hemlock stand at the east edge of the clearing without alarm. The rational explanations had run out. I did not have a category for what was left. I went inside and primed the pump and checked the stovepipe collar and noted the creek stonework in my pocket log. I did not write it in my official report. Dell in Kessler Falls did not need that information. What he needed from me was the condition of the roof and the state of the stovepipe seal, and I gave him that. Then I sat on the porch step with Callie and poured the 2 cups of coffee, the one for me and the one for the rail post, and I looked at the tree line, and I waited. Now, here is the thing about waiting when you have been a surveyor. You learn to wait without expectation. You set your instruments and you hold your position and you let the measurement come to you, because if you lean toward it, you introduce error. I had been leaning toward an explanation for 3 weeks, and it had not helped. I stopped leaning. The week after the porch board was the 3rd week of November, and the mornings had gone fully cold, the frost line dropping lower on the slope each night, the creak audible from the porch in that brittle, thin way it gets when the temperature is working on it. I came up on Monday and the door was closed and the bar was dropped, same as before, and I let myself in and made my rounds and came back to the porch and sat with Callie and the 2 cups and the cold air and the tree line. Nothing happened that morning, not that I could see. On Thursday, I parked the truck at the gate and walked in before first light, a thing I had not done before. I wanted to see the clearing in the transition from dark to pale, the way the tree line emerged from the night. There was no particular reason to think this would tell me anything. It was just what I needed to do. The clearing was very quiet, the kind of quiet that has texture to it, the way sound folds in on itself at altitude in cold weather. I stood at the edge of the clearing by the gatepost and listened, and what I heard was an absence where there should have been something. The Douglas fir stand on the south side of the clearing typically carried a pair of Clark's nutcrackers in the morning, 2 birds who had announced themselves every visit since October with that dry, repetitive, rasping call. They were not calling. They were not moving in the branches. The branches were still. Animals go quiet for 2 reasons: predator pressure, or something large and calm that does not register as a threat, but still registers as present. Callie was beside me at my knee. She was looking at the east hemlock stand. Her tail was low. Her posture was the same careful stillness I had seen before. She was not afraid. She was attending. I walked slowly towards the cabin, and as I walked, I was aware, in the way you are sometimes aware of a thing before you have fully processed it, that the dark at the tree line was not uniform. At the left edge of the hemlock stand, where the firs began, there was a density of shadow that did not have the branching, layered quality of trees. It was solid, it was tall, taller than the hemlock understory, and it was still in a way that was different from the stillness of wood. I stopped walking. Whatever was there was not moving. I was not moving. Callie had stopped beside me, her shoulder against my leg, and she was still looking, the same patient attention she had shown the 2 weeks before. Nothing in it that spoke of alarm or aggression, only a quality of recognition that I found later, when I had time to think about it, more clarifying than anything else. She had been watching this for weeks. She had known. I stood there and let my eyes work the shadow the way you work a survey when you are not sure what you are seeing, taking in the periphery instead of the center, letting the shape build from what surrounds it. What surrounded the dark was hemlock, and the dark was taller than the hemlock, and it was wider across the shoulders than anything I had a category for in the fauna of the Cascades, and it did not move the way a bear moves, which is with a constant small adjustment, a living animal's continuous negotiation with gravity. It held, then it moved. not away, toward the porch. I did not run. I was not afraid, which surprised me later when I replayed it, because by any ordinary logic, I should have been. What I felt was closer to the sensation of standing at a new elevation mark and having the numbers on the rod come back exactly as the map predicted. A feeling of something large and complicated resolving into clarity. It moved slowly, with a deliberateness that was itself a kind of communication. Nothing hurried, nothing hidden. It crossed the edge of the clearing in the grey of early light, and I could see it fully then. Tall enough that the porch roof line was at its shoulder level, dark-furred across a breadth I did not try to measure because measuring felt wrong in that moment. And it moved to the porch rail with the particular care of something that does not want to alarm. I have told this part of the story twice. Once to Claire months later on the phone. Once to you, now. Both times I have found myself short of words for what I watch next. Not because the words do not exist, but because none of them are exactly right. It set something on the rail. It placed the object beside the cup I had set out that morning. My standing cup, Nora's ritual, carried up the mountain by a man who could not stop doing it. And then it was still for a moment with its hand, if hand is the word, resting near the rail but not touching the rail. And in that stillness, something passed between us that I do not have a precise term for. It was aware of me, not alarmed by me. Aware the way you are aware of someone you have been watching for long enough that they are familiar. Then it withdrew. Not fast. It moved back across the clearing with the same deliberateness it had come with, and the hemlock stand received it, and the clearing was empty, and the Clark's nutcrackers started calling from the south fir stand almost immediately, that dry, repetitive sound filling the air like a door being unlocked. I stood there until I could move. Then I walked to the porch. The cup on the rail was the one I had poured that morning. Beside it, placed with care on the weathered railwood, was a second cup. Not a tin cup like mine, not ceramic, not anything manufactured. Creek clay, shaped by hand, the finger impressions still visible in its rough walls, the form slightly asymmetric the way a hand-shaped thing is always slightly asymmetric. It had been dried, not fired, dried in the way that creek clay dries if it is left in the cold air long enough, pale and rough-surfaced and solid in the way that means patient waiting. Someone had watched me pour that cup every Monday and every Thursday for 7 weeks, had understood what the gesture was, and had answered it. I picked up the clay cup and held it. It was cold from the November air. I could feel the textures of the fingers that had shaped it. I set it back on the rail beside my cup and sat down on the porch step, and Callie came and pressed herself against my knee. And I sat there for a long time without thinking about anything that needed measuring or filing or explaining. What I thought about was Nora, standing at the back step in January with a cup of black coffee in her hand, the steam rising in the cold, her voice carrying in from the kitchen, telling me I was welcome to believe it was raccoons if I needed to. What I thought about was the quality of ordinary care, the kind that does not ask to be witnessed or rewarded, the kind that persists because the person doing it believes at some level they may not be able to fully articulate that the world is worth the gesture. I had inherited that habit without choosing to. I had carried it up the mountain every week. Something had been paying attention. I did not weep on the porch step. I want to be accurate about that. I am not a man who weeps easily, and I was not built differently that morning. What happened was something quieter, something that had been set like concrete for over a year, that had to do with Nora and with absence, and with the particular heaviness of being useful without being known. Something in that hardness shifted. Not broke, not dissolved. Shifted the way a stone shifts in a creek bed when the water rises and finds a new way around it. I drove down the mountain, when the light was good and full across the clearing. I stopped at the gate and sat in the truck for a while with the engine off. And then I drove the 19 miles of gravel to the paved highway and turned toward Kessler Falls. And at a wide pullout where the valley opened up below the ridge, I stopped and took out my phone. It rang 4 times. Dad. One word. The particular way she said it, something careful and still hopeful in it, told me she had been waiting for this without being sure it was coming. Claire, I said, I'm sorry it's been so long. I heard her take a breath. It's okay, she said. Then, because she is more honest than that, she said, It's not okay, but I'm glad you called. I know, you're right. I could hear something in the background of her house, her daughter's voice. My granddaughter May, who was 4 years old, and who I had not seen since the summer before Nora died. I had not known how to be a grandfather to her in the absence of the woman who would have known how to do that. May's here, Claire said. I heard. I looked out over the valley, the ridgeline above it, the sky going from grey towards something cleaner. I'd like to come see her, when you're ready for that. There was a pause that had several things in it. We're ready, Claire said. We've been ready. The rest of the conversation was practical. Dates and whether I would drive or fly and what the guest room situation was. And I was grateful for the practical part because it meant we did not have to keep standing in the open space we had just moved into. I said I would call again before the end of the week. I did. I went back to the Aldermore cabin the following Monday, and the Monday after that, through the rest of November and through December, and the door continued its habit of being closed when I returned from the perimeter walk, though I had long since stopped trying to account for that by any mechanism I understood. I kept leaving the coffee cup on the rail. The clay cup sat where it had been placed, through the cold, through a heavy snow week in late December that the metal roof handled without complaint, through the freeze and the partial thaw, and the deeper freeze of January. I filed complete and accurate reports for Dell through the winter months. The creek stone porchwork I noted as an informal repair of unknown origin that was structurally sound, and in my judgment should be left in place. Dell wrote back that he would pass the notation to the owner, and that the main thing was the cabin was in good hands. He did not ask further questions. I visited Claire and May in January, drove the 6 hours to Portland in a clear spell between storms. May was formal with me the first afternoon in the way that small children are formal with near strangers, and by the second morning she had decided I was acceptable and wanted to show me everything in her room, which took most of the morning, and was fine. Claire and I talked in the kitchen after May was in bed, longer than we had talked in years. Not about everything, not about all of it, but enough. The concrete had not fully unhardened, but there was water finding its way through. I drove home in a different kind of quiet than the one I had been carrying. What the 7 weeks at the Aldermore cabin had done for me is something I have had a long time to think about now, and I still do not have a tidy account of it. I know what I saw. I know what was placed on that rail. I know that it was not a thing I could have explained before it happened, and cannot fully explain now, and I have stopped needing the explanation the way I would once have needed it, which is itself a kind of change I notice. The following spring, when the snow left the ridge and the access road reopened, I drove up on the first clear Monday in late April. The clearing was green and damp, the firs holding their deep colour against the pale new growth coming in at the understory. The porch was intact. The creek stonework in the corner had seated further over the winter, packed tighter by the frost cycle, level and solid. The bar latch was dropped, same as always. I primed the pump. I walked the perimeter. The nutcrackers were back in the south fir stand, calling back and forth in the cool morning. Everything was as it should be. I came out to the porch with the thermos and poured my cup and set it on the rail. The clay cup was still there, right where it had been placed in November, pale and rough-surfaced and slightly asymmetric, the finger impressions visible in its walls. The winter had not touched it in any way that mattered. Creek clay, dried hard in the cold, patient and plain, and exactly what it was. Callie settled on the porch step in the spring light, her chin on her paws, her good ear turning toward the tree line with that unhurried attention she had been practicing for months. The hemlock stand at the east edge of the clearing was still and dark and full of its own quiet. I drank my coffee and watched the light come into the clearing and did not need anything explained. The clay cup sat on the rail where it had been left for me, and it will sit there until the wood under it gives out, and maybe longer than that, and some mornings that is enough to know. If you've carried something like this, something you can't fully put into words but can't set down either, there's another story waiting for you on the screen.